There is a kind of goodness that makes everything harder, not the goodness of the obvious saint, not the goodness that announces itself, not the goodness that expects recognition and receives it, the harder kind, the goodness of a person who simply will not allow themselves to benefit from something that was not clearly theirs to take, the goodness that creates difficulty, not through selfishness, but through the refusal to be selfish at the moment when selfishness would make things simpler. This is the goodness that caused 3 years of empty throne. When Ojin Tenno died, the emperor who had come from the crossing, the man who would become Hachiman, the god at the corner of every street, there was the question of who would succeed him. He had sons, several sons, and the son who was the obvious choice, the one designated, the crown prince, was Ujinowaki Ratsuko, and Ujinowaki Ratsuko did not want to be emperor. This is not unusual in the Kojiki. The Kojiki has several people who do not want what they are being given, who resist the honor, who find reasons to decline. But what makes this case particular is that the person next in line, the brother, Usazaki no Mikoto, who would become Nintoku Tenno, also did not want to take what his brother was not taking. Two brothers, two people who believed that the other deserved it more, both of them insisting, neither of them yielding. The fish was the symbol of it. During the 3 years, when neither brother would sit on the throne, when Ojin Tenno had died, and the succession had not been settled, a fisherman came with an offering, a gift of fish, fresh fish, the kind of offering you bring to a new emperor to express loyalty. He went first to Ujinowaki Ratsuko. The crown prince said, "I am not the emperor. Bring it to my brother in Naniwa." The fisherman went to Naniwa. Usazaki no Mikoto said, "I am not the emperor. Bring it to my brother in Uzi." The fisherman went back to Uzi, back and forth, until the fish was no longer fresh, until the fish had rotted in the hands of a man who was trying to bring an offering to someone who would accept it. The Kojiki records this story with a kind of dry understanding. It says, there is a proverb that arose from this, a proverb about getting what you put in motion. Back on yourself. The fisherman went back and forth, because both brothers were too good, and the fish rotted, because both brothers were too good, and the proverb came from the rotted fish. The throne sat empty for 3 years. Then Ujinowaki Ratsuko resolved it, in the only way that a person with this kind of goodness can resolve an impossible situation. He said, "I understand now that my brother will not relent, and if I continue to live and continue to refuse, I am a burden to the world. I am keeping the throne empty by my existence." He was a young man. He was not old. He was not ill. He was simply too good for the situation he was in. He died. The Kojiki says he decided that the decision was his, that the way he resolved the impossibility he was in was to remove himself from it. His brother came running. He had heard what was happening. He ran to Uzi to be with his brother to try to prevent it. He arrived too late. He sat with his brother's body. He called his name 3 times. He said, "Wake up, wake up, wake up." Ujinowaki Ratsuko woke. For a moment, he looked at his brother. He said, "I know your purpose in coming, but this is fate. No one can stop it. When I see our father, I will tell him how many times you tried to give me what was mine. I will tell him everything you did." Then he gave his brother a gift, a sister, an unmarried sister, a person he could add to his household, a small offering, at the end of an impossible impasse, and then he died for good. Usazaki no Mikoto became Nintoku Tenno, the 16th emperor, the one called Nintoku, which means something like virtuous and able, the one who is called the Holy Emperor Hijiri no Mikado, in the tradition that gave him the highest honor available. He earned it, not because of conquest, not because of military campaigns, or territorial expansion, or the defeat of powerful enemies, because of smoke. There is a hill in the province of Kawachi, the province to the east of Naniwa, from which, on a clear day, you can see the valley, and the rice paddies, and the houses clustered along the roads, and the smoke rising from the cooking fires, or not rising. Nintoku Tenno climbed that hill. In the early years of his reign, he looked out over the valley. He was looking for smoke, the smoke of the cooking fires, the smoke that means people are warm, people have food, people are in their houses, preparing meals. He saw very little smoke. This is the moment. This is the moment that defines him. In the Kojiki's telling, not a battle, not a divine encounter, a man on a hill, looking at how little smoke was rising from the valley, and understanding what it meant. It meant the people were poor, poor enough that they could not afford to cook meals, that the cooking fires were not lit, that the ordinary daily act of preparing food was not happening at the scale it should be. He came down from the hill, he went back to the palace, and he stopped collecting taxes for 3 years. 3 years with no taxes, no labor corvée, no demands on the people for the construction of palaces, or the maintenance of roads, or any of the other things that the state ordinarily requires from the people it governs. He let them keep everything. For 3 years, he let them recover. The palace was not maintained. This is also recorded. The Kojiki notes it carefully. The walls of the palace crumbled. The thatch of the roof rotted. When it rained, the rain came through the roof. The emperor and his household moved from room to room to stay dry. They wore their clothes until they wore out. They did not replace them. The palace of the 16th emperor looked, after 3 years, like a place that had been abandoned. His wife asked him about it. She said, "Why do you call this prosperous? Look at the palace. Look at the roof. Look at the walls. Is this prosperity?" He said, "The emperor exists for the people. The people are the foundation. When the people are poor, I am poor. When the people are rich, I am rich. The smoke is rising now. The people are cooking. They are warm. They have food. This is prosperity. After 3 years, the people themselves rebuilt the palace. They came without being asked. They came with their tools and their labor, and they rebuilt the walls, and they rethatched the roof, and they built it better than it had been before. This is the Kojiki's picture of the ideal emperor, not the conquering hero, not the divine descendant, exercising the authority of the gods, the man on the hill, looking at the smoke, deciding that the smoke matters more than the roof. Part 2. Iwanohime no Mikoto. She was not a mild woman. The Kojiki is quite clear about this. Iwanohime no Mikoto, the empress of Nintoku Tenno, was a woman of strong feeling that did not soften or become more manageable with time, strong feeling that expressed itself in ways that were direct and sometimes dramatic and occasionally catastrophic for the people on the receiving end. She loved her husband. This is also clear. The strength of the feeling that expressed itself as jealousy was the same strength as the feeling that was being threatened. You cannot be jealous about something you do not love. The size of the jealousy was the size of the love. Nintoku Tenno was not a faithful husband. This is not surprising. In the Kojiki's world, the emperors are not expected to limit themselves to one woman. The genealogies of the Kojiki are full of multiple wives and multiple sets of children by multiple mothers. This is simply how things worked. But knowing how things worked did not make Iwanohime accept how things worked. The first story is about Kurohime. Kurohime was a woman from Kibi, a province to the west of Yamato, a woman of particular beauty, a woman whose reputation had reached the palace in the way that such reputations travel, through messengers and rumors, and the particular attention that beautiful women receive from people who think it is their business to report such things to those in power. Nintoku Tenno summoned her. He brought her to the palace. He made her one of his consorts. Iwanohime found out. What followed was not subtle. Iwanohime went to where Kurohime was, and everything she did was designed to make Kurohime's position in the palace completely untenable. The Kojiki does not give the details with the same precision it gives to battles and divine encounters. It says simply that Iwanohime was not welcoming to Kurohime, that Kurohime's position became impossible, that eventually Kurohime had no choice but to leave. She went back to Kibi. She went home. She left the palace because staying had become impossible. Nintoku Tenno, when he learned she had gone, followed her. He traveled to Kibi. He went to find her. This is also not subtle. The emperor following his departed consort to her home province is a statement. It says, I am willing to do what it takes. I am willing to make the journey. I am willing to show publicly that I want this person to be in my life. He found her. He spent time with her family. He was charming, as the Kojiki suggests he often was. He and Kurohime sang poems at each other, on the shore. She sang, "The wind blows the clouds apart. The way we are being separated. I will not forget you." He sang back, "Who is that going toward Yamato? Who is that, my secret one?" He came home without her. She stayed in Kibi. The Kojiki does not tell us what became of her after. She sang her poem on the shore and faded from the record. Iwanohime knew what had happened. When Nintoku Tenno returned from Kibi, Iwanohime refused to see him. She would not come out. She would not speak to him. The doors were closed between her and her husband, and they stayed closed. He tried to reach her in the way that the Kojiki's men always try to reach the women who will not be reached directly. He sang to her. He composed poems. He stood outside her door and sent words in. She composed poems back, not forgiving ones. The Kojiki gives us her poems, and they are sharp. They ask, "Whose husband is that?" Going back to Yamato, they say, "People are looking at you and knowing what you did." The poems went back and forth. The door stayed closed. Then came the episode with the Nagi tree. Iwanohime went to the shrine of Sumiyoshi. She went there to perform a rite, a purification, the kind of ritual that a person performs when they need to set something right, or mark a change, or bring themselves back into alignment with the sacred. While she was gone, Nintoku Tenno took another woman into the palace. Her name was Yatanohime, a princess, a noble woman. He brought her in. He established her in the palace. He sent her poems. This is the one that broke something permanently. Iwanohime came back from Sumiyoshi. She came to the shore at Naniwa. She heard what had happened. She would not get off the boat. She sat in the boat at the shore and refused to land. She would not come into the capital. She would not come home. Nintoku Tenno came to the shore. He tried to speak to her. He sent his ministers to speak to her. She would not hear them. Eventually she left. She turned the boat around and went somewhere else. She went to the province of Ki, and she stayed there, and she did not come back. The Kojiki gives us the poems from this separation. Nintoku Tenno sent poems after her. He compared himself to a nagi leaf floating on the water, going wherever the current takes it, unable to direct itself. Iwanohime wrote back. She wrote about the nagi tree at the shrine of Sumiyoshi. She said she had seen it, she had been near it, and everyone around it seemed to know something she hadn't known yet. The Kojiki presents these poems without commentary. It does not say who was right. It does not say whether the anger was justified or the behavior was wrong. It gives the poems. It lets the reader hear. Two people in an impossible situation, sending words back and forth, across water. She did not come back. She stayed in Ki. She built a palace there. She lived there. The Kojiki records that Nintoku Tenno visited her once. He traveled to Ki. He came to the palace she had made for herself. She would not receive him completely. She sent food out to him, a token, a gesture that acknowledged his presence without undoing the separation she had chosen. He ate the food. He composed a poem about the fish in it. The poem was about the particular fish that had been sent to him, the fish of those waters, and how they tasted of the place. She wrote back, a poem about the fish, too, about catching them and offering them, about what it means to give something to someone you are not going to go to. The exchange of poems about fish is one of the small, perfect moments in the lower volume of the Kojiki. Two people who loved each other and had wounded each other and could not repair the wound and could not stop reaching across it with words. Poems about fish sent between a woman in her self-imposed exile and the man who had driven her there and could not stop trying to reach her. Iwanohime died in Ki. She died away from the palace, away from Naniwa, in the province she had chosen, over the life she had left. Nintoku Tenno came to her when she died. He came to bring her back. He had her brought back to Yamato and buried there. The Kojiki gives her this last acknowledgement that even though she had been away, even though she had chosen not to return, she was brought back to the place where she should be and placed there, and her name was given to the tomb, and the tomb is there. Iwanohime no Mikoto, the great empress, the woman of strong feeling, the one who would not stay. She is in the Kojiki, more fully than most women, not because she was mild, because she was not. Part 3. The Holy Emperor. Nintoku Tenno ruled for a long time. The Kojiki gives him 83 years on the throne, which is the kind of number that tells you the Kojiki is not operating in ordinary historical time. 83 years is a reign that spans generations, a reign that starts when a man is young and ends when everyone who knew him as young has been dead for decades. The number is less important than what it represents. What it represents is continuity, the sense that the time of Nintoku Tenno was a long time, an era, a period that had its own character and its own accumulation of events, enough to fill the memory with stories that were still being told. When the Kojiki was compiled, there were other stories beyond Iwanohime, beyond the smoke on the hill. There was Midorinohime, the bird princess, a woman Nintoku Tenno wanted, a woman who refused. He sent a messenger. The messenger was Hayabusa Wakenomiko, the Falcon Prince, a young man supposed to deliver the imperial request and bring back the acceptance. The Falcon Prince delivered the message. Midorinohime heard it, and then she looked at the messenger, and she chose the messenger. This is the kind of story the Kojiki tells without flinching. The woman who was summoned looked at the man sent to summon her and made a different choice. She said no to the emperor. She said yes to the messenger. They ran. There was nowhere in the islands that was truly beyond the emperor's reach, but they ran anyway. The Falcon Prince and the Bird Princess, moving through the provinces, trying to get far enough away that the problem would resolve itself. Nintoku Tenno was not furious in the way that some emperors in the Kojiki are furious. The Kojiki does not give him a rage-filled pursuit. It gives him something quieter, the particular frustration of a man who had everything and could not get this one thing. They were eventually found. They were eventually caught. The story ends badly for the Falcon Prince, but the Kojiki gives Iwanohime the same dignity it gives Iwanohime, the dignity of a woman who knew what she wanted and chose it, even when the cost was high, even when the choice put someone else in danger. The other side of Nintoku Tenno. He is the Holy Emperor, the man who watched the smoke, the man who let the palace rot so the people could eat. And he is also the man who could not stay faithful, who kept bringing women into the palace, who drove Iwanohime to exile, who caused the Falcon Prince to lose everything. Both are true. The Kojiki does not choose between them. It does not say he was the Holy Emperor, and therefore the other things don't matter. Or it does not say the other things happened, and therefore the Holy Emperor story is false. It holds them together, the man who watched the smoke and the man who could not stop, wanting what he wanted. This is the Kojiki's understanding of what human beings are, even the holiest ones, even the ones who have genuine greatness. They are also the other thing, the smaller thing, the thing that does not fit the greatness. Nintoku Tenno is not diminished by the Kojiki's honesty. If anything, he is made more real, more present, more the kind of person you can actually imagine, standing on a hill and looking at smoke and making the decision to wait, because he is also the kind of person who could not stay faithful, and people who cannot stay faithful are people we know. They are real. They are here. They look at smoke sometimes, and they do extraordinary things. The tomb, Nintoku Tenno's tomb, is the largest burial mound in Japan. Not the most famous, not the most visited, the largest. It is in Sakai, in the province of Izumi, south of Osaka, a keyhole-shaped mound, the shape that the great tombs of the ancient emperors take, a circle joined to a trapezoid like a round mirror with a handle. The numbers are not modest. The mound is nearly half a kilometer long. The area it covers, including the moats that surround it, is larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. This is the tomb of the man who let his own palace rot so the people could keep their taxes. The contradiction is real, and the Kojiki does not explain it. The man who chose poverty for himself while ruling was buried in the largest construction in the history of the islands, but the tomb was built after, built by the people, built by the descendants of the people who had been allowed to keep their harvests and cook their food and let the smoke rise from their fires. This is the Kojiki's understanding of the relationship between the emperor and the people. Not that the emperor is above the people, not that the people exist for the emperor, that the people remember, that the people who were allowed to be warm built the largest tomb in Japan for the man who allowed it, that the relationship runs both ways, that what you give comes back to you in forms you did not predict and could not have planned. The smoke on the hill, this is the image, the one that defines the reign, not the tomb, not the battles, not even Iwanohime and her exile, a man on a hill, looking at what is not there, looking at the absence of smoke, and understanding what the absence means. This is what governance is, in the Kojiki's understanding. The ability to look at what is not there, and understand what it means, the willingness to act on that understanding, even when the action costs you. The roof can rot, the roof can be rebuilt, the people cannot be rebuilt. The people are the foundation. Nintoku Tenno understood this. He climbed the hill. He saw the absence of smoke. He came down. He stopped the taxes. He ate in a cold palace, while the people ate in warm houses, and he called this prosperity. The Holy Emperor, Hijiri no Mikado. The word Hiziri is old. It carries in it the idea of someone who has separated themselves from what is ordinary, who has gone beyond the ordinary human preoccupations, who operates in a register that is closer to the sacred than the merely functional. Nintoku Tenno did not separate himself, he did the opposite. He connected himself more deeply than most emperors to the ordinary life of the people. He governed, he watched the smoke, he lived without heat, so others could have it. And this is what made him Hiziri, not separation, connection, the willingness to feel what the people felt, the willingness to be cold when they were cold, to be poor when they were poor. This understanding of holiness runs through the lower volume in different forms. It is the holiness of the person who climbs the hill, the holiness of the act of looking, the holiness of understanding what the looking reveals, not a holiness that removes you from the world, a holiness that takes you into the world more fully, into the particular lives of the particular people who are living in the world right now. The smoke is the measure, not the palace, not the army, not the territory. The smoke, whether it is rising, whether the people are warm, whether the ordinary day is possible for the ordinary person. This is the measure. This is what Nintoku Tenno understood. This is why he is called holy. The largest tomb in Japan, the smallest roof, both are his. Both are true. Part 4. The Emperors of the Middle Period, between Nintoku Tenno and Yuryaku Tenno, the last emperor the Kojiki gives. A full story too. There are several generations. Richu Tenno, Hanzei Tenno, Ingyo Tenno, Anko Tenno. Their names, their wives, their children, the careful genealogy, that is the spine of the lower volume. But between the names, there are stories, not the great arching stories, of the upper and middle volumes. not the stories of the creation of the world, or the sun hiding in the cave, or the white bird flying home. Smaller stories, human stories, stories about people who found themselves in difficult positions and made choices that the Kojiki thought worth recording. The story of Okusaka no Miko and the Secret Prince in the reign of Ingyo Tenno, the 19th emperor. There was a prince who loved a woman. The emperor also wanted. The prince was Okusaka no Miko. The woman was Oshinumi no Waka Hirume. Okusaka no Miko wanted her for himself, but she was being offered to the emperor, and in the world the Kojiki describes, you did not simply take what the emperor was also reaching for. So the prince did something clever. He did something that would later be used against him. He gave the woman a gift, a belt, a beautiful belt, a gift that acknowledged what was happening without crossing the line into open competition. Someone told the emperor about the belt, not as it was, as it wasn't. They said Okusaka no Miko had given the woman a love gift, a declaration, a claim. The emperor was told that the prince was rivals with him, that the prince had presumed. This is the oldest kind of story, the story of the person in the middle, the person who tells the emperor something that is not quite true, but is not quite false either, that is shaped to produce a specific reaction. That is the kind of thing that someone says when they want to other people to destroy each other. Ingyo Tenno believed it. Okusaka no Miko was killed. The woman was taken to the palace anyway. The person who had told the lie was found out eventually, was punished eventually. The truth was established eventually, but Okusaka no Miko was already dead. The truth came too late for the person it most needed to reach. The Kojiki records this in the register it uses for the moments when the world fails the person who was trying to do something reasonable, without comment, without the moral drawn. It happened. This is what happened. The prince gave a belt. Someone lied about the belt. The prince died. Kinmei Tenno and the light under the door. Actually, this is not the story of Kinmei Tenno. The Kojiki is moving toward the end of what it will tell in detail. The lower volume becomes sparser as it approaches the moment when the Kojiki was compiled. The stories that are told briefly. A reign gets a paragraph. An event gets a sentence. The genealogy takes more space than the episodes, but there is Anko Tenno, the 20th emperor, and his death is one of the episodes. The Kojiki gives in some detail. Anko Tenno was asleep. The Kojiki is specific about this. He was asleep under a tree. A child found him. The child was a prince, the son of a man. Anko Tenno had killed. The child found the emperor asleep and stood over him, and the child had a reason to want what was not his to want. The Kojiki says the child wept. The child stood over the sleeping emperor and wept because what the child felt was too large for the child, because the situation the child was standing in was one that no child should be standing in. The tears fell on the emperor. He woke. He looked up at the child. He saw the tears. He asked why. The child told him. The child said, "My sleeves are wet from the dew. The sleeves are wet, and I am cold." Anko Tenno looked at the child. He believed the answer. He went back to sleep. He should not have gone back to sleep. The child had more in the heart than wet sleeves. The child had the grief and the anger that children carry when they are made to carry things that are too heavy for children. And the emperor went back to sleep. The Kojiki says what happened next, says it plainly, in the way it always says the things it has to say. The successors, after Anko Tenno, came 3 brothers who fought each other for succession. Karuno o Iratsuko, Yasushiro no o Iratsuko, o Hatsuse no Wakatakeru no Miko. The one who won was o Hase no Wakatakeru no Miko. None became Yuryaku Tenno, the 21st emperor. The last one the Kojiki tells fully he won the succession, the way successions were sometimes won in this period, not through the orderly designation of an heir by a dying emperor, through the elimination of the competition. He was violent. The Kojiki knows this. It does not conceal it. He killed his brothers. He killed rivals. He killed people who stood between him and the throne. He was also, the Kojiki says, strong. Not strong in the way of Yamato Takaru, who was strong in a way that exceeded his container, but strong in the way of someone who was capable of the full range of what is possible, the range that includes destruction and also includes the particular acts of care and attention that are sometimes the other face of that same strength. This is the generation before Yuryaku Tenno, the generation of the brothers fighting, of the man asleep under the tree, of the child with wet sleeves, who was not only wet from dew. The lower volume of the Kojiki is not the volume of heroes, it is the volume of succession, of the difficult, ordinary work, of deciding who comes next, in a world where the question of who comes next is the question everything else depends on. The gods argued about it. The land paid for it. That was the story of the upper volume. The middle volume added the heroes. The lower volume shows the settling, the long, slow work of establishing which family, which line, which particular branch of the divine descent would carry the responsibility forward. It is not always a beautiful process. The Kojiki does not pretend it is. It records the wet sleeves and the man who went back to sleep. It records the brothers who killed each other for the throne. It records it all, because the record is the point, the unbroken chain, from the first gods to the living emperor, even the broken parts of the chain, even the moments when the chain was held together by something other than virtue. The chain is still the chain, the long middle between Nintoku Tenno and Yuryaku Tenno. There are 5 emperors: Richu Tenno, Hanzei Tenno, Ingyo Tenno, Anko Tenno, and the brothers who fought each other. Before Yuryaku Tenno emerged, each of them had a reign. Each reign had events. Some of those events, the Kojiki records in brief. Some are given only the genealogy, the wives and the children, the length of the reign. Richu Tenno, the 17th emperor, was the son of Nintoku Tenno. He had Hanzei Tenno as his brother. His reign was troubled from the start by the ambitions of a brother who was willing to use violence to get what he wanted. The Kojiki gives us a glimpse of what it cost Richu Tenno to deal with this: the effort, the political maneuvering, the particular difficulty of being the emperor when someone in your own family does not accept your authority. Hanzei Tenno came after him, and Ingyo Tenno after that, each carrying the line forward, each adding their names to the long list that is the Kojiki's backbone. Ingyo Tenno had a quality the Kojiki notes specifically. He was concerned with truth. He was concerned with knowing who was actually of noble blood and who was claiming to be, without the claim being real. He had a method for determining this. He required the people to put their hands in boiling water. The innocent would be unharmed. The ones who were lying about their lineage would be revealed by the burning. The Kojiki presents this without the commentary a modern reader might expect. It simply says, this was how the truth was found. This was the method. The method tells us something about what the period required. The truth about lineage was so important. The stakes of false claims so high that extreme measures were considered appropriate, because the lineage was everything. The lineage determined your position, your right to participate in governance, your family's place in the order. The question of who had what blood was not an abstract question. It was the question that everything else depended on, and Ingyo Tenno was an emperor who wanted to know. The actual answer, not the claimed answer, the actual one. The chain continues through the boiling water, through the brothers who fought, through the man asleep under the tree, through all of it. The chain continues. Part 5. Yuryaku Tenno. The first poem in the Kojiki is a love poem. Susanoo made it standing in Izumo after the serpent was dead, and the palace was being built, and the woman he had kept safe as a comb in his hair had been returned to herself. He made the poem about fences, the many fences of love, the desire to build walls around the person you love. The last extended poem in the Kojiki is also a love poem, and it is spoken by Yuryaku Tenno, the 21st emperor. the one who killed his brothers, the one whose name means something like heroic strategy, the one the Kojiki describes as having the qualities of both power and violence. This pairing is not accidental. The Kojiki begins and ends its great poetic moments with love. The first poem and the last poem, the storm god and the violent emperor, two people on opposite ends of the spectrum of force, and both of them in the moment of the poem reaching towards someone with words. The poem of Yuryaku Tenno comes from a moment on a mountain. He was on the mountain of Katsuragi, hunting. He saw a young woman. She was in the fields. She was working. She had a basket for gathering greens, and she was gathering them with the concentration of someone who is doing an ordinary thing and not expecting the day to be anything other than ordinary. Yuryaku Tenno saw her. He said, "Who are you? What is your family? What is your name?" She said her name was Akashi Kome, the daughter of the lord of the district, a woman of good family, but not of imperial family, a woman in a field on a mountain who had not expected this. He said, "There is no one comparable to you here. There is no one as fine. When I go back to the palace, I will send for you. Wait for me." She bowed. She waited. He sent for her. He was not quick about it. Time passed. The Kojiki does not specify how much time, but enough time. That waiting was not easy. Enough time that a woman in a field might wonder whether the words spoken on the mountain were words that would be kept. He sent for her. She came. When she arrived, Yuryaku Tenno made the poem. He spoke it to her directly. The Kojiki gives it to us, and the translators have worked at it for centuries, and what it says at its heart is something like this: "I planted spring greens on the little mountain. Now I do not know how many nights have passed since I planted them. The girl of the Komori mountain, who was working in the fields, who was working without stopping, how many nights have passed since I saw you?" He is counting the nights. He is saying, "I lost track of how long it has been. The time passed, and I was aware of the passing, and the thing I was waiting for was you." She answered him. She said something that means, "You are the king of this great land, like the spring greens you planted. The nights I have waited, the many nights, they had been waiting for each other, both of them counting, both of them aware of the time between the mountain and the arrival." This is how the Kojiki ends its last detailed emperor story. Not with conquest, not with the expansion of borders, not with the final pacification of the last resistant people, with an exchange of poems about counting nights, with a man who had killed his brothers, and a woman who gathered greens, finding each other through the patience of waiting and the language of counting. The Kojiki is doing something deliberate here, something that echoes. The first poem and the last, the world it describes, is a world of force and consequence, of divine power and human frailty, of gods who hide in caves, and emperors who let their roofs rot, and princes who die because someone lied about a belt. But the thing that brackets it all, the thing at the beginning and the end, is not the force or the consequence. It is the poem. It is the reach across the space between two people, with words, the acknowledgement that someone else is there, is real, is worth the making of the poem. Yuryaku Tenno's other stories, the Kojiki gives him more than the poem. It gives him episodes that show the range of his nature. There is the story of the mountain on Katsuragi. He was hunting again. He met a god who looked like him, who dressed like him, who carried the same kind of tools. Yuryaku Tenno demanded to know who this person was. He said, "In this land there is no god but me. Who are you?" The god said his name, Hitokoto Nushi no Kami, the god of the single word, the god of speech, the deity who lives in the power of the single correct utterance. The emperor threatened, the god withdrew. The encounter left Yuryaku Tenno uneasy. Later he made offerings to the god. He recognized that what he had done was not wise, that the god on the mountain was not to be threatened, that the single word, correctly spoken, had more force than any amount of imperial authority. He made the offerings. The god was appeased. This is a story about the limits of power, about the emperor whose reign was defined by the willingness to use force, meeting the deity who embodies the power of the precise word, and having to acknowledge that the word is not less powerful. The silkworm. In the reign of Yuryaku Tenno, the Kojiki tells us, the practice of sericulture was advanced. Silk, the cultivation of silkworms, the weaving of silk cloth. This is not a story, it is a note, a small annotation in the record, but it matters. Silk was coming from the continent, silk and the people who knew how to make it, the connections that Jingu Kogo had established, the connections that Ojin Tenno had deepened through the welcome of the man from Kudara, who brought the books, were producing results. The silk was real, the weaving was real, the knowledge crossing the sea and becoming part of Japanese life was real. The Kojiki records this. In the reign of Yuryaku Tenno, the violent emperor, the poem maker, the one who threatened the god and then made offerings. In his time, the silk was coming, the knowledge was arriving, the world was changing in ways that had nothing to do with force. The end approaches. After Yuryaku Tenno, the Kojiki's lower volume continues for several more emperors, but the level of detail drops. The stories become shorter, The genealogies become longer. The Kojiki is approaching, the moment that is close enough to the present of its compilation, that the records are still fresh, that the living people could verify what is written, that the story begins to intersect with what people remember rather than what people recite. The age of myth ends. The age of legend ends. The age of the detailed story ends. What remains is the list, the careful, necessary, essential list, the names and the dates, and the successions and the lineages that prove the thing the Kojiki was made to prove, that the line is unbroken, that it runs from the first stirring in the universe to here, to now, to the person who commissioned this work. The line is unbroken. This is the argument. This is what the Kojiki is. An argument in the form of a story that says, here is where it began. Here is every step from there to here. Here is the proof that the person sitting on the throne has the right to sit on the throne, not by conquest, not by agreement, not by the consent of the governed, or the will of a parliament, or any of the other sources of authority that the world has developed, by descent, by the unbroken line, from Izanagi's left eye to the living emperor, the sun, the moon, the storm, and all the generations since. The line is unbroken. The Kojiki says so, and the Kojiki was written so that the saying would survive. Part 6. What the lower volume knows. The lower volume of the Kojiki knows something the upper volume does not. The upper volume knows everything, or at least it knows the things that happened before memory, before writing in the age when the gods walked, the same ground as the wind, and every event was a divine event, and every person was a divine person, or descended from one, close enough that the distinction barely mattered. The upper volume has the freedom of the age before accountability, the freedom of myth, the freedom to say, this is how it was, without anyone present. Who can say, it was not quite like that? The lower volume does not have this freedom. The lower volume is about people who were not gods, people who lived within living memory, people whose descendants were still alive when the Kojiki was compiled, people whose graves could be visited, whose shrines could be seen, whose names were still spoken by the families that carried them. The lower volume knows that it is being watched, that what it says will be compared to what people remember, that the Kojiki's credibility depends on its accuracy here, in the way it does not quite depend on its accuracy about the age of the gods, where no one is left to contradict. This changes the quality of the writing. The upper volume has grandeur, the creation of the world, the gods who made the islands, the sun hiding in the cave, the storm god finding the sword. These are large events told in large strokes. The lower volume has detail, names of women, names of the women's families, names of the children, whose daughter married whose son, which province the family came from, which shrine was established in whose reign. This is not less important than the grandeur. It is differently important. The grandeur tells you what Japan is. The detail tells you who Japan is. The specific people, the specific families, the specific connections that make the ruling class, and not some other collection of people, the families. The lower volume is full of families, not just the imperial family, the families that surrounded the imperial family, the families that provided wives, the families that held the administrative positions, the families that performed the sacred rituals, the families that maintained the weapons, the families that kept the horses. Every time the Kojiki says, "This woman was the daughter of that man, who was the head of such a family," it is making a political statement. It is saying, this family matters. This family has been close to the center for this long. This family's contribution is part of the record. The Kojiki is not just a mythology, it is a court document. It is a record of who has standing, and what that standing is based on. It is the genealogical foundation of the social order. When Onoya Sumaro sat down with Hiedanoare's recitations and began to write, he was not only writing stories for the entertainment of the empress, he was writing the legitimacy of every major clan in the archipelago, the names that carry history. Some of the names in the lower volume are the names of places you can visit today. The province of Kawachi is now the eastern part of Osaka. The palace sites of the ancient emperors are in the area around Narato, Osaka. The tomb of Nintoku Tenno is accessible by train from Osaka Station. The names of the ancient districts have become the names of modern cities. The roads that the emperors traveled have become the routes that trains follow. The mountains that the Kojiki mentions are still the mountains they were. The rivers still run to the same sea. This is one of the things that Japan has done that not every country does. It has maintained continuity between the ancient names and the living landscape. The names in the Kojiki are not the names of a dead civilization. They are the names of places that are inhabited now, where people go to work, where children go to school, where the trains run, and the convenience stores stay open through the night. The ancient and the current occupy the same geography. They are layered. The ancient is underneath. The current is on top. But the ancient is still there, still present, still named. What the poems know. The lower volume has fewer poems than the upper and middle volumes, but the poems it has are different in quality. The poems of the upper volume have the distance of myth. The poem of Susano about the fences is beautiful in the way that something very old and very carefully preserved is beautiful. You are aware of the age. You are aware of the distance between the poem and you. The poems of the middle volume are the poems of heroes, the death poems of Yamato Takeru, the longing for the folded mountains, the wish to be a crane. These are the poems of extreme circumstance, of the person at the end of their strength, finding one more thing to say. The poems of the lower volume are the poems of ordinary people in extraordinary situations, or extraordinary people in ordinary situations. Iwanohime's poems about the nagi tree and the husband who did not come home. Yuryaku Tenno's poem about counting the nights since the girl in the field. These poems are close. They are not the distance of myth. They are the proximity of human feeling, the feeling you have when someone you love has been away too long, the feeling you have when you are waiting, and the waiting has become more than waiting. This is what the lower volume knows. It knows that the story is not only about the extraordinary, not only about the gods and the heroes and the divine descents and the white birds. It knows that the story is also about this, the person at the door who will not open, the fish going back and forth between two brothers who will not accept it, the child standing over the sleeping man, claiming that his sleeves are wet from dew, the woman in the field, waiting the many nights. The Kojiki holds all of it, the cosmic and the intimate, the age before time and the night after the argument, the first gods and the last detailed emperor, the creation of the islands, and the exchange of poems about fish. This is why it has been read for 1,300 years, not because it answers everything, because it contains everything, because the range of it is the range of human experience, the range from the very first to the very ordinary, and both are given the same respect, both are written down, both are preserved. The lower volume knows this better than any other part, because the lower volume is where the story becomes the most like the story we are living. The story we are living also has its genealogies, its lists of names, its careful accountancy of who came from whom. The story we are living also has its moments of the ordinary made meaningful, the smoke on the hill, the fish sent back and forth, the poem slipped under the door. The lower volume knows that this is where the reader lives, not in the age of the gods, not in the age of the heroes, in the age of the ordinary work, in the age of the governance, in the age of the smoke, and the lower volume holds space for that. It says, your age is also in the record, your work is also the thread, your smoke is also the measure. The Kojiki was written for you. not only for the empress, not only for the court, for the person who would one day receive the story and find in it something that resonated with the ordinary, extraordinary work of living in the world that was made. Part 7. The Succession Wars. The lower volume of the Kojiki is partly a record of what happens when the line is unclear, when the emperor dies without having made unambiguous who should come next, when there are multiple sons by multiple mothers, and each son has supporters, and each supporter has reasons, and the reasons are incompatible. This happened more than once in the generations between Nintoku Tenno and Yuryaku Tenno. It happened in the succession after Ingyo Tenno, the 19th emperor. His death left multiple heirs, and the multiple heirs did what multiple heirs in the Kojiki tend to do. When there is no clear resolution, they reached for the same thing. They could not both have it. One of them was Yuryaku Tenno, and Yuryaku Tenno was the one who was willing to do what the others were not willing to do. Kinmei Tenno's ascension, and the brothers before him. But before Yuryaku Tenno, there were the 3 brothers who competed for the throne. After Enko Tenno, the 3rd of them was Ohatsu Senowaka Takeru no Miko, the future Yuryaku Tenno. I was not the eldest. He was not the most senior, but he was the most willing to act. He killed the 1st brother. He killed the 2nd brother. He took the throne. The Kojiki records this plainly. No drama beyond the fact. No extended account of the conflict. Just the sequence. The brothers. The deaths. The succession. This is how it sometimes went. The Kojiki knows this. The Kojiki was compiled in the reign of an empress. Who understood this? The court that received the Kojiki was not naive about what the succession of emperors sometimes required. The Kojiki does not celebrate this. It does not condemn it. It records it. The line continues. This is what matters to the Kojiki's argument, not the virtue of each step, the continuity of the line, the women behind the succession. There is another way to read the succession struggles of the lower volume, not as the competition between brothers, but as the competition between their mothers. Each son had a mother. Each mother had a family. Each family had interests. When the father emperor died, the question of who would succeed was also the question of which mother's family would hold the greatest influence over the court. The mothers are not invisible in the Kojiki. Their families are named. Their origins are specified. The record knows that the emperor's mother determines in part the emperor's relationship to the powerful families whose cooperation the emperor needs. Iwanohime understood this. This is part of why her jealousy was more than personal. When another woman entered the palace, it was not only the emperor's heart, That was at stake. It was the future. It was the question of which child would be the heir, and therefore which family would stand behind that heir, and therefore which family would hold power when the next succession came. Iwanohime's anger was reasonable, not only as the feeling of a woman who was being displaced, but as the calculation of a person who understood the stakes. The palace at Naniwa. Nintoku Tenno built his palace at Naniwa, the place that is now Osaka, the place at the mouth of rivers, where the land meets the sea, where ships come in, and goods are transferred, and the movement between the islands and the continent has always been managed. Naniwa has been important for as long as Japan has been Japan, longer probably. The geography of the place made it important before anyone thought to call it anything. The rivers coming down from the mountains, the sea opening to the west, the delta that is rich and navigable and capable of supporting the kind of concentrated population that makes a capital possible. Nintoku Tenno chose it, or chose to stay there since his father Ojin Tenno had also been associated with that area. The palace at Naniwa was the political center of the most important period in the early history of the islands, the period when Japan was becoming Japan, when the connections to the continent were deepening, when the writing and the silk and the new things were arriving and being absorbed and changing the shape of what was possible. All of this was happening in the time of Nintoku Tenno. All of this was happening in the palace whose roof was rotting while the emperor waited for the smoke to rise, the long view, to read the lower volume of the Kojiki in the light of the upper volume is to understand something about how Japan understood itself. The upper volume is the why Japan exists, why the islands were made, why the sun is in the sky, why the sword is in the shrine. The middle volume is the how the empire was established, how the East and the West were brought into the order, how the heroes died, and what their deaths meant. The lower volume is the what the established empire actually was, what the daily work of governing looked like, what happened when the succession was unclear, what the women felt when the emperor was unfaithful, what the view from the hill looked like when the smoke was not rising. Together they make a complete picture, or as complete a picture as a single text can make. The why without the what is myth with no application. The what without the why is history with no meaning. The Kojiki gives both. It says why and then it shows what. It connects the divine to the human through the middle volume's heroes, and lets the lower volume show what the human looks like up close. Up close, the human looks like this. It looks like a fish going back and forth between two brothers. who will not accept it. It looks like a woman who will not open her door. It looks like a child saying, "His sleeves are wet from dew." It looks like a man on a hill, looking for smoke. It looks like a poem about counting the nights. This is what the human looks like when you are close enough to see it. Not the gods and the white birds, not the serpent and the sword, the fish, the door, the smoke, the poem. All of it is in the Kojiki. All of it is Japan. All of it is the story of a place trying to understand itself through the record of what happened in it and what it meant. The place where succession is decided. In the lower volume, the succession is decided in ways that are sometimes orderly and sometimes not. The brothers who yielded to each other for 3 years, the brothers who killed each other for the same prize, both happened. Both are in the record. The Kojiki does not choose between them. As the model, it records both. It records Ujinowaki Ratsuko, yielding with grace, calling his brother a sage, giving away what was his. It records Yuryaku Tenno, taking what he wanted. Through the elimination of alternatives, both men became emperor. Both reigns are in the record. Both contributed something to the story of the line. The Kojiki's point is not which method is better. The Kojiki's point is that the line continued, that what was past, that the thread, however it was held from one hand to the next, was not broken. The thread is the argument. The continuity is the proof. The unbroken line, from the first stirring to the living moment, is what the Kojiki was made to demonstrate, and it demonstrates it through the story of brothers who yielded, through the story of brothers who fought, through the rotting roof and the world's largest tomb, through the closed door and the poem about the fish, all of it the thread, all of it the unbroken line. Part 8. The Poetry of the Lower Volume. The Kojiki has been called a book of poems held together by prose. This is not entirely accurate. The prose carries real weight. The genealogies and the narratives and the place name explanations are not simply the glue between the poems. They are essential to what the Kojiki is, but the poems are where the feeling is. The poems are where the Kojiki stops being a record and becomes an expression, where the chronicler's voice yields to the character's voice, where what actually happened becomes less important than what it felt like to be inside it. The Kojiki has more than 100 poems. Some scholars count them differently, depending on how you define a poem in the Kojiki's context, but roughly 100, spread across the 3 volumes, from Susanoo's poem about the fences to Yuryaku Tenno's poem about counting the nights. The form. The poems in the Kojiki are not in the form that Japanese poetry will later take. the classical waka, the 31-syllable poem, that becomes the dominant form, for 1,000 years is close to the Kojiki's poems, but not identical. The Kojiki's poems are sometimes longer, sometimes structured differently. They carry in them the marks of a tradition that is still finding its form, still discovering what the poem, in Japanese, can be. By the time of the Manyoshu, compiled in the century after the Kojiki, the waka form is more settled. The 31 syllables, the pivot word, the image that doubles, the feeling that is too large for the image to contain, but is contained by it anyway. The Kojiki's poems are the predecessors, the rougher versions, the versions that are still learning what they are trying to do. But in the roughness, there is also a directness, a quality of the statement, made before the conventions of the form required certain things to be said in certain ways. Iwanohime's poems, she makes several. The one about the nagi tree, she says she went to the shore of Sumiyoshi and saw the nagi tree's leaves lying in many layers on the shore. The nagi tree is sacred. Its leaves do not wither and fall separately, but stay on the branch and fall together. When they fall, she uses this image to say something about her situation, about the hope that things that are meant to be together will be together, about the question of whether she and her husband are like the nagi leaves or like leaves that fall separately. She does not answer the question. The poem asks it. That is the poem's job, not to resolve, to sharpen, to make the feeling precise enough that the listener understands exactly where the sharpness is. She also makes the poem about coming back from Ki. She went to Ki. She was away from the palace. She had chosen to be away. When she came back, she came to Naniwa by boat. She made a poem about the boat, about the waves, about the journey, about what it felt like to be returning to a place you had left in anger and were returning to, not because the anger was gone, but because you were returning anyway. The return is its own feeling, not the same as staying, not the same as leaving. The particular feeling of going back to the thing you had walked away from, knowing that walking away did not resolve it, and going back will not resolve it either. But that going back is still what you are doing. Nintoku Tenno's poems, he makes the poem about the nagi leaf. He compares himself to the leaf, floating on the current, going wherever the water takes it. This is a self-deprecating poem. He is the emperor. He could, in theory, stop the current. He could take action. He could choose a direction. But the poem says he is the leaf, not the water, not the force that determines the direction, the thing that is moved by it. This is the emperor who watched the smoke and decided to let the palace rot, the man who saw that the right action was sometimes the action of not acting, of not demanding, of letting things be what they were, rather than forcing them into a shape that suited him. He says he is the Nagi leaf. He says the current is taking him. He says he cannot direct himself to the place he wants to go. It is an honest poem. It says, I am in a situation I cannot control. I am in a current that is carrying me. The place I want to be is where the current is not going. The exchange, when Iwanohime and Nintoku Tenno make poems to each other, the Kojiki presents them in sequence. First his poem, then her poem, then his again, then hers. This is the form of the exchange poem, the kakei, the conversation in verse. What is remarkable about this exchange is that both poems are preserved, not just his, not just the emperor's, hers too. The woman who was angry, who would not open the door, whose poems were sharp, in the way that Iwanohime was sharp. The Kojiki preserved them both. This is a statement about what the Kojiki valued, not only the emperor's perspective, not only the official version, the exchange, the conversation, both sides of it, both sides of the door. Yuryaku Tenno's poem again, the poem about the spring greens, the poem about the mountain, the poem about the nights. What makes this poem remarkable is not its artistry. The poems of the Manyoshu and the later tradition are more technically accomplished. The pivot words are sharper. The imagery is more layered. The conventions are more fully developed. What makes Yuryaku Tenno's poem remarkable is who is making it. This is the violent emperor, the one who killed his brothers, the one who threatened the god on the mountain, the one whose reign was defined by the willingness to do what was necessary and the willingness to define necessary broadly. And this man is standing in a field, saying to a woman he has just met, I planted spring greens. How many nights has it been? The violence and the tenderness in the same person. The man who took what he needed by force, reaching toward a woman with a poem about waiting. The Kojiki holds this. It holds the contradiction of what people are, the capacity for destruction and the capacity for the quiet poem about counting nights, both in the same person, both real, both true. The poems are the proof. If the Kojiki only told us what the emperors did, we would have a chronicle, a list of events, a genealogy. The poems tell us what the emperors felt, or what the tradition believed they felt, or what the feeling was that was associated with their names by the people who preserved the stories. Either way, the poems are the evidence that these were people, not just positions, not just names in a list, people who wanted things, and felt things, and reached for them, with words, when direct action was not enough. The Nagi leaf, the spring greens, the nights, the smoke, the fish, all of it, feeling, all of it, Japan, reaching toward itself with words. Part 9. The World Beyond the Islands. The Kojiki is not only about Japan. This seems like a strange thing to say about the founding text of Japanese civilization, the book that traces the divine origin of the Japanese islands and the Japanese emperor and everything that makes Japan what Japan is. But the Kojiki knows that Japan is not alone. It knows there is a continent. It knows there are kingdoms to the west. It knows that things have been coming from those kingdoms since before the Kojiki was written. The Kojiki records the arrivals, not with great detail, not with the attention it gives to the domestic politics of the imperial court, but it notes them. It says, in this reign, this happened, these people came, these things arrived. The Silk people, in the reign of Ojin Tenno, the Kojiki says, people came from the continent who knew how to weave, how to work with silk, how to do the things that produced the cloth that had been coming from the West as tribute and trade, but that Japan could not yet make itself. These people settled, they established families, their descendants became part of the court system. They were given the responsibility of maintaining the craft they had brought with them. This is the pattern, the arrival, the establishment, the integration, Japan absorbing what came to it and making it Japanese, the craft becoming a Japanese craft, the people becoming Japanese people, their knowledge becoming Japanese knowledge. This has been happening since the beginning of the Kojiki's history. The Kojiki itself began from something that came from the continent, the writing system, the characters, the ability to write at all. The Kojiki is a Japanese text, written in a Chinese script that had been adapted for Japanese sounds. The whole text is the product of the meeting between Japan and the continent, the meeting that had been going on since the age of Jingu Kogo and Ojin Tenno, Kudara no Kuni, the kingdom of Kudara on the western peninsula, appears several times. In the lower volume, it sends tribute, it sends people, it sends objects, a horse, a sword, a mirror, things that were valuable, and that the sending of them acknowledged the relationship between the kingdoms. Kudara no Kuni is now part of Korea. The relationship between the Japanese islands and the Korean peninsula in this period was more complex and more connected than later history sometimes acknowledges. People moved between them, things moved between them, ideas moved between them. The Kojiki knows this. The lower volume records the arrivals from the peninsula as ordinary events, expected, part of the ongoing traffic of goods and people and knowledge that the sea between them did not prevent. The horse. There is a specific horse in the lower volume, sent from a kingdom to the west, a gift, a diplomatic gesture. The horse arrived. The Kojiki notes it, not with much ceremony. The horse arrived and that was that. But the horse matters, because the horse is a reminder that the history of Japan in this period is not the history of an isolated island nation. The horse came from the continent. The silk came from the continent. The writing came from the continent. The Buddhism that would come in the next century would come from the continent. All the things that would define what Japan was and is came from somewhere else and were made Japanese in the making and the doing and the generations of being here. This is not a diminishment. It is a description of how cultures work, how they always have, how the boundaries between them are more permeable than the boundaries suggest. The ships, the sea between the Japanese islands and the continent is not a barrier, it is a road. This is how it has always been, in the thinking of the people who lived on both sides of it. The sea is what you cross, not what stops you. Ships have been crossing that water for as long as there have been ships, for as long as there have been people. Who could build something that floated, and who had a reason to go? The Kojiki's world is a maritime world. The islands are surrounded by water. The water connects them to each other and to everything beyond. Jingu Kogo crossed the sea. The fish came under her ships. The kingdom submitted. Ojin Tenno was born on the way back. The child who became the god at the corner was born over the water. The sea is not a boundary in the Kojiki. It is a medium for the things that cross it, and the people who cross them, and the knowledge that arrives when the crossing is complete. What came and what stayed, the things that came from the continent and stayed, the silk, the writing, the horses, the mirrors and swords, the people who knew the crafts, but also the things that came and were changed. The writing system was Chinese. Japan took it and adapted it. The man-yogana, the way of writing Japanese sounds in Chinese characters, then the hiragana, then the katakana. The Japanese writing system grew from the Chinese the way a plant grows from a seed, related to the origin, but not the same as it, something new. This is the Japanese achievement of this period, not the rejection of what came from outside, not the uncritical acceptance of it, the transformation, the making of something new from the meeting of what was here and what arrived. The Kojiki itself is this achievement, a Japanese story told in an adapted Chinese writing system that had been transformed to carry Japanese sounds and Japanese words The Kojiki is the product of the crossing, the product of Jingu Kogo's ships, and Ojin Tenno's welcome, and the man from Kudara and his books. All of it flows into this. The text in your hands, the words in this voice, the story of where Japan came from, told in the language that was possible only because of everything that came before it. The world beyond the islands is in the Kojiki, not as an outsider, not as a foreign element, as part of the story, as part of what Japan is. The continent gave things, Japan received them, Japan transformed them, Japan made them part of itself. The islands are surrounded by water. The water is full of roads. The roads have been traveled since before the islands were called Japan, and what traveled them made Japan what it is. The roads are still there, the sea between the islands, and the continent is the same sea, the same water, the same crossing. Ships still cross it, people still cross it, ideas still cross it. The traffic of the human world, moving between places, connecting what is here to what is there, continues. The Kojiki recorded the first crossings, or the crossings that were first, in the memory of the people who compiled it. The crossing of Jingu Kogo, the arrival of the man from Kudara with his books, the silk workers, the horse. What arrived then is now Japanese. What was foreign has been absorbed and transformed and made part of the living tradition. The characters that came from China became the writing system of Japan. The Buddhism that came from India through China and Korea became Japanese Buddhism. The silk techniques became the silk tradition of Japan. Transformation, not rejection, not uncritical acceptance. The third thing, the making of something new. From the encounter, this is what Japan has done, again and again, in the age the Kojiki records, and in every age since. Take what comes across the water, hold it, transform it, make it yours. The islands are still here, the water is still here, the roads are still open, and what travels them still has the possibility of becoming something that could not have existed without the crossing. Part 10. The Women of the Lower Volume. The lower volume has more women than the upper or middle volumes, not more named women. The genealogies of all three volumes are full of women's names, but more women whose inner lives are given space, more women who are not only the mother of this son, or the wife of that emperor, but people with their own perspectives, their own desires, their own ways of responding to the situations they were put in. Iwanohime is the central example, but she is not the only one. Kurohime from Kibi, she arrived at the palace because the emperor wanted her. She was beautiful, and the emperor heard about it and summoned her, and she came. The Kojiki does not tell us what Kurohime wanted. It does not ask. The question is not part of the record. What the record preserves is what happened to her, and what she said when it was clear she had to go. She had to go because Iwanohime made her position impossible. She went back to Kibi. She returned to her family. She went home. And at the shore, when Nintoku Tenno came after her, she made a poem. She said, "The wind comes and scatters the clouds that were together are separated." She was saying, "I do not want to forget you. I will not forget you, even though I am going, even though the wind is separating us. The way the wind separates clouds." This is the poem of a woman who had no choice in most of what happened to her, who was summoned, who was driven away, who was followed, who was at the shore with the emperor, and had to say goodbye again. And her poem is not about what was done to her. It is about what she felt. The wind, the clouds, the not forgetting Midorinohime, the woman who refused, who said no, who looked at the messenger and chose the messenger over the emperor. The Kojiki gives her the least space. Of the women in this section, her story is brief, what she did and what followed. But what she did was remarkable. In the world of the Kojiki, she was offered to the emperor. She turned the emperor down. She chose what she wanted instead of what she was being given. The cost was high. The cost for everyone involved was high. The Kojiki records the cost, but it also records the choice. It records that she made it, that the choice was made, that the woman who was being offered looked at the situation and did something other than what was expected. Oshinumi no Wakahirume, the woman that Okusaka Nomiko loved, the woman he gave the belt to, the woman whose name is connected to the story of the belt and the lie. She was brought to the emperor anyway. After Okusaka Nomiko's death, the emperor did not let the lie's consequences prevent him from taking what he had wanted. The Kojiki notes this. It notes it without comment. The woman who was the center of someone's devotion and the object of someone's lie ended up in the palace. Her feelings are not recorded. The Kojiki does not ask, but the fact that she is named, that her name appears in the record, means she is not invisible. She is there. Her presence acknowledges that she was a person in the story, not only a reason for the story. Akashikome, the woman in the field, the woman Yuryaku Tenno saw on the mountain of Katsuragi. She was gathering greens. She was doing ordinary work. She was not expecting to be seen by the emperor. He asked her name. She gave it. He told her to wait. She waited. This is what the record says. She waited. The poem preserves the waiting, the many nights. She also made a poem when he finally sent for her, and she came. and he spoke the poem about the spring greens. She answered. She said, "You are the great lord of this land. I have waited the many nights, the way the spring greens wait to be gathered. This poem is gracious. It does not say, 'Why did you take so long?' It does not say the waiting was difficult. It says, the waiting is what was required, and you are worth the waiting. And I am here now. This is the art of the poem, the art of saying what needs to be said in the form that serves the moment and the relationship." She waited. He noticed. She acknowledged both. The poem moved the story forward. The women the Kojiki preserves. They are not all the same. They do not all respond the same way. They are not all gracious. They are not all defiant. They are not all tragic. Iwanohime was strong and did not forgive. Kurohime was gentle and remembered. Midorinohime refused and paid the price. Akashikome waited and answered with grace. The Kojiki did not intend, probably, to create a record of the range of women's responses to the world they were in, but it did, because the women were there, because they spoke, because their poems were remembered, because the tradition that preserved the Kojiki preserved their words along with the emperors. The record is richer for them, not as illustrations of the emperors' lives, but as themselves, people in a specific time, responding in specific ways to specific situations. Their poems are still here. The women who spoke them are still here in their speaking. The court women, the women of the Kojiki's lower volume, are also the ancestors of the women who will make the next great tradition of Japanese literature. In 2 or 3 centuries, the women of the Heian court will produce the Genzi Monogatari and the Makura no Soshi and the Tosaniki and all the other texts that define the classical tradition. They will do this partly because of the Kojiki, because the Kojiki had preserved the poems of Iwanohime and the poems of others like her, because the tradition of women making poems and having those poems preserved was established in the age. The Kojiki records, the line from Iwanohime to Murasaki Shikibu is longer than 1,000 years, but it is a line. The tradition of the woman's poem, the tradition of the woman's voice in the literature of Japan, it began here, in the lower volume, in the poems made, at the closed door, at the shore, in the field. The door, Iwanohime's door, it is the central image of her story, not the shrine, not the exile, not the tomb, the door she would not open, the door between her and her husband, the door that the poems went through when nothing else could. In Japanese literature, the door is a recurring image, the space between, the place where the inside meets the outside, the place where the decision to open or not to open is made. Iwanohime kept hers closed. This was a choice with consequences, a choice that shaped the rest of her life and the record of her life. She kept the door closed. She let the poems through. She answered the poems. She did not open the door. This distinction is important. The poems could pass. The words could pass. The feeling could pass. But not the person. Not the physical presence. Not the closing of the distance. The door was the boundary. She maintained. The poems were the evidence that something was still alive on the other side of the boundary, and the Kojiki kept both, the door and the poems, the closed door and the reaching through it, both true, both preserved, both necessary to the story of Iwanohime no Mikoto. Part 11. The end of the record. The Kojiki ends quietly, not with a declaration, not with a final poem, not with a scene that gathers everything up and places it in the light of a single concluding moment. It ends with a genealogy, the last emperor in the record, his wives, his children, the careful accounting of the line, and then it stops. This is appropriate. This is exactly right. The Kojiki is not a story with a conclusion. It is a record with an endpoint that was determined by the moment of its compilation. It stops where it stops, because Onoya Sumaro stopped writing, because the record caught up to the living moment, because the story had reached the present, the frame. Onoya Sumaro wrote a preface. It is one of the most important pieces of writing in the Kojiki. He explains what the Kojiki is. He says the Emperor Tenmu was concerned that the old records were being corrupted, that the versions being told in different families were diverging from each other, that the true account of the origins was at risk. He says the Emperor ordered Yuryaku to memorize the old records, to hold them in a single person's memory, to prevent the divergence by making one authoritative version. Then the Emperor Tenmu died before the records could be written down. Decades passed. The Empress Genmei came to the throne. She ordered that the records finally be written, that what Yuryaku had memorized be set down permanently. Onoya Sumaro did the writing. He wrote in 4 months, January to September, of what would later be called 712 CE. He presented the text to the Empress, and the Kojiki existed for the first time in writing, where it could survive. The survival. The Kojiki survived. This is not as obvious as it sounds. Many texts from ancient Japan did not. The fires and the floods and the wars and the simple decay of time took most of what was written. In the first centuries of Japanese literacy, the Kojiki survived because people kept copying it. One person copied it for another. One family kept a copy. One monastery kept a copy. The copies diverged slightly. The scholars compared them. The scholars are still comparing them. The study of the Kojiki is still an active scholarly field, still producing new interpretations, still finding things in the text that previous readings had missed. This is the life of the text, the 1300 years of the Kojiki being read and studied and translated and performed and made into films and manga and plays and referenced in advertising and cited in political speeches and memorized by school children and argued about by scholars and simply read quietly by people who wanted to know where Japan came from, the text and the present. The Kojiki was written to serve a political purpose, to establish the legitimacy of the imperial line, to say, this is where the emperor comes from. This is the unbroken chain. This is why the throne belongs to this person and not another. It served that purpose. The imperial line it documents is still the imperial line of Japan. The emperor of Japan today is the descendant, according to tradition, of the gods described in the Kojiki. The enthronement ceremonies still use the three sacred treasures, the mirror, the jewel, the sword, but the Kojiki has become more than that. It has become the story Japan tells itself, about itself, not only the story of the throne, the story of the land, the story of why the cherry blossoms fall, the story of why the peach keeps evil away, the story of why there is a shrine at the corner, the story of why the East is called the East. The political purpose was the occasion of the text, but the text outgrew the occasion. The text became what Japan needed it to be, which turned out to be more than what it was made for. Reading the Kojiki now. To read the Kojiki now is to read something old in the way that very old things are old. Not old like a newspaper from last year, not old like a book from the previous century, old like a rock, old like a shrine, old like the mountain that was there. Before anyone came to name it, the Kojiki carries in it the smell of the age. Before writing, before the characters, before the careful archiving, the smell of the story told at night by firelight to people who leaned in to hear the part about the serpent, or the part about the cave, or the part about the peach tree at the slope of the underworld. Those people are gone. The fire is out. The night that story was first told is many thousand nights ago, but the story is still here, in the text, in this voice, in the quiet of whatever place you are in right now. The quiet. The Kojiki was compiled in the 8th century. It describes events from the age before time is counted to the first few centuries of the Common Era. It was told in the oral tradition for longer than it has been written, and now it is here, in this voice, in this language, in a form that the people who first told it could not have imagined. A voice in a machine, a story in a file, a text that can be heard anywhere there is a device and a signal. The form has changed. The content is the same. The serpent, the sword, the smoke, the door, the fish, the white bird, the things that the Kojiki preserves, because they were worth preserving, because they said something true about what it means to be human in the particular place that is Japan, in the particular time that includes all the time, from the cracking of the cosmic egg to this moment, which is also that time, which is also the story, which is also you, in whatever quiet place you are listening from. The world was made. Now someone had to run it, and they did, generation after generation, with varying amounts of skill and virtue and wisdom, with the occasional moment of grace, like the smoke on the hill, with the occasional moment of failure, like the sword left behind. They ran the world. They are still running it. You are part of the running. The Kojiki knows this about you, not you specifically, but the you that comes after, the person who would one day receive this story, the person on the other side of the text. Onoya Sumaro wrote it for the empress, and for the people after the empress, and for the people after them, and eventually for you. He could not have imagined the form in which you would receive it, the voice in the device, the story in the air, the words traveling without paper, without brush, without the physical object of the scroll or the book, but the words are the same words, or close to them, or in the spirit of them. The same story, the same images, the same thread. From the egg to here. The thread is in your hands now, or in your ears, in the part of you that receives stories and holds them. Hold it gently. The thread is old. It has been held by many hands before yours. It will be held by many hands after. Your part in the holding is your part, no more and no less. Rest now. Part 12. What Nintoku Tenno left behind. The largest tomb in Japan. People visit it. They go to Sakai, south of Osaka, and they stand at the edge of the moat and look at the shape of the mound and try to understand what they are looking at. From the ground, it does not look like much. It looks like a hill, a large, wooded, oddly shaped hill, in the middle of a city. The moats that surround it give it an island quality, the sense of something, set apart from its surroundings, protected by water. From the air, it is different. From the air, the keyhole shape is clear, the round part and the trapezoidal part. the shape that the great tombs of the old emperors always take. No one knows for certain why this shape was chosen. The scholars have theories. The shape may have had ritual significance. The shape may have been practical. The shape may have been simply the shape that was used, the way certain shapes become the shapes of their era, without anyone deciding it explicitly. What is certain is that the scale was intentional. The largest tomb in Japan was built for someone who was considered the most important emperor to be buried, or the most important person to memorialize. The largest expression of the culture's capacity to build large things was deployed for this person, the smoke and the tomb. The Kojiki's story of Nintoku Tenno has two aspects that seem to contradict each other. The story of the smoke is a story of restraint, the emperor who chose poverty for himself, who let the palace rot, who measured prosperity not by what he had, but by what the people had. The tomb is a story of scale, the largest burial mound in human history by area, the labor of many years, the expression of power through the massive deployment of earth and stone and water. The same person, the same reign, both true. The Kojiki records the smoke. The historians record the tomb. Together they give us a picture of an emperor who contained both the impulse to restrain and the impulse to build on the largest possible scale. Perhaps the restraint in life made the scale in death possible. The people who benefited from the 3 years of no taxes were the same people, or the descendants of the same people, who built the tomb. The smoke on the hill came first. The tomb came after. The restraint made the scale available. Or perhaps it is simpler. Perhaps the same quality that could see the smoke and understand its meaning could also understand what scale of memorial was appropriate for the person who had seen it. The city above the tomb. Sakai is a city, a real city, with streets and shops and schools and the ordinary infrastructure of a modern Japanese city, and in the middle of it is the largest burial mound in the history of the world. People drive past it. They walk past it. Their children go to school a few blocks from it. The tomb is part of the landscape in the way that old things become part of landscapes, familiar, present, not always noticed, but it is always there, under the trees, in the moats, holding within it whatever it holds. The emperor who watched the smoke, the emperor who let the roof rot, the emperor who said, "The people's prosperity is my prosperity," in his tomb, in his city, in the landscape that was once the rice paddies of the province from which he watched the smoke, the persistence of things. This is something the lower volume knows, that the upper volume does not quite know in the same way. Things persist. The events of the upper volume are so far in the past that their persistence is the persistence of myth. The serpent is gone. The cave is a story. The spear is a concept. The events of the lower volume are close enough that their persistence is physical. The tomb is there. The shrine is there. The place name is there. The province where Kurohime was born still exists. The coast where she made her poem is still the coast. The mountain where Yuryaku Tenno met the woman in the field is still a mountain. People still walk on it. The persistence of the lower volume is the persistence of geography, of the places where things happened, still being the places where things happened. You can go. You can stand in those places. You can look at the same view, the same mountains, the same water, not the same sky exactly, but the same kind of sky, the sky that was there when the poems were made, the same and not the same. This is the quality of historical places, the same and not the same geography, different people, different structures, different sounds, different smells, but underneath, the same shape, the same relationship between the land and the water, the same slope of the mountain, the same position of the shrine. When you stand in the place where something happened, you are not in the moment it happened. You are in the present, which is different, but you are also in a relationship with the past, a physical relationship, the same ground, the same geography, the connection that place provides between what was and what is. The Kojiki is partly a guide to these connections. It tells you where things happened. It gives you the name of the place. It says, here is where the smoke was seen. Here is where the poem was made. Here is where the door was closed. And the places are still there, under different names sometimes, under different buildings, but still there, still the geography that shaped the events. Nintoku Tenno and the present. His tomb is a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2019, the largest burial mound in the world, by area, was named a World Heritage Site in the year that is, 1207 years after the Kojiki was compiled. The man who watched the smoke from a hill in Kawachi, who let the palace roof rot while the people recovered their harvests, who said the people's warmth is my warmth, whose tomb was built by the people he had kept warm, is now recognized by the international community as having left behind one of the most significant material legacies in human history, the largest, the world's largest. What he left behind is the world's largest by the measure of area, and what the Kojiki says about him is about the smoke. The smoke is the story. The tomb is the context. The smoke is what he understood. The tomb is what the people built. to remember what he understood. The smoke, it is rising now, somewhere in the city that surrounds the tomb, somewhere in the country that was made by all the people, whose names are in the Kojiki, and whose descendants are alive right now. The smoke is rising, the fires are lit, the food is being prepared. This is prosperity. This is what it looks like. The smoke rising everywhere. Part 13. The closing of Part 3. 3 volumes. The upper volume. The Age of the Gods. The Egg. The Spear. The Islands. The Cave. The Serpent. The Sword. The Descent. The First Emperor. The middle volume. The Age of the Heroes. The Prince Too Strong for His World. The Fire and the Sea. The White Bird. The Woman Who Crossed the Water. The lower volume. The Age of Governance. The Smoke on the Hill. The Door That Would Not Open. The Poem About the Spring Greens. The Tomb That Is the World's Largest. 3 volumes. 1 story. What the 3 volumes say together. The upper volume says, here is where everything came from. Here is the before. Here is why the world is the way it is. The middle volume says, here is what it costs to be great. Here is the hero. Here is the hero's limit. Here is the white bird that flies when the hero can no longer walk. The lower volume says, here is what happens after. Here is the ordinary, extraordinary work of maintaining what the gods made and the heroes established. Together they say, this is Japan, from the before to the after, from the gods to the governors, from the cosmic egg to the smoke rising from the kitchens. The Kojiki's argument. The Kojiki was compiled with a purpose. Its purpose was to establish the legitimacy of the imperial line, but its argument, the argument it makes, by simply existing, by containing what it contains, is larger than that purpose. Its argument is that Japan has a continuous story, a story that goes back to before stories were written, a story that has been told and preserved by the people who lived it, and the people who remembered it, and the people who finally wrote it down. A continuous story, unbroken from the first stirring of the universe to the living moment. This is not only a political argument, it is a cultural argument, an identity argument, the argument that the people who live in these islands are the people of this story, that the story is theirs, that they are in it, the inheritance. To read the Kojiki is to receive an inheritance, not a financial one, not a material one, a story inheritance, the inheritance of knowing where the story started and what happened in it, and how it came to include this moment, the inheritance of the smoke on the hill, the inheritance of the white bird, the inheritance of the sword in the dark shrine, the inheritance of the poem at the closed door, the inheritance of the spring greens and the many nights. You carry this, whether you know you carry it or not. The story is in the landscape. The story is in the names. The story is in the practices that are still practiced without always knowing why. The peach at the festival, the mirror in the innermost place, the shrine at the corner, the cherry blossoms falling, all of it is in the Kojiki. All of it traces back to the decisions and the events and the moments that the Kojiki preserves, the way it was told. Before it was written, the Kojiki was spoken. Someone spoke it to someone in a room, around a fire, or in the open air, or in one of the places where people gathered to remember things together. The speaking was the keeping, as long as someone spoke it, and someone listened, and the listener remembered, and later spoke it again. The story was alive. Iwanohime held it all. In one person's memory, a whole mythology, a whole genealogy, a whole literature, in one person. Then Onoya Sumaro wrote it down, and the writing took over. The work of keeping. The writing could hold it, without the person needing to hold it. The writing could be copied, could be stored, could be sent, could survive the death of the holder. The transition from speaking to writing is one of the great transitions of human culture. The Kojiki is a record of that transition. It is the text that was made at the moment when Japan was making that transition, the spoken into the written, the remembered into the preserved, and now the written is being spoken again. The text is being read aloud. The cycle is complete. Speaking, writing, speaking again. The same story, different forms, the same essential act of one person reaching toward another with words about where we came from and what happened here and why it matters. The next volume, Part 3, ends here, but the story does not end here. After Yuryaku Tenno, the Kojiki's last detailed emperor, the line continues. The emperors continue. The country continues. The Buddhism arrives. The capitals move. The great clans rise and fall. The poetry tradition deepens. The stories multiply. The writing becomes more sophisticated. The culture accumulates. What cultures accumulate over centuries of being alive and changing and absorbing and transforming. All of this is not in the Kojiki. The Kojiki stops. It stops at the moment of its compilation. It stops where the memory has been turned into writing, but the story it tells is the foundation of everything that comes after. The stories that the Heian poets told, the stories that the medieval warriors lived, the stories that the modern country remembers, all of it built on this: the egg, the spear, the islands, the smoke on the hill, the spring greens. Sleep now. Part 3 is done. The world was made. Someone ran it. It is still being run. You are part of the running, part of the story, part of the long continuity that has been going on since the egg cracked and the sky rose and the first gods came into being. The smoke is rising somewhere. The fires are lit. The food is warm. Sleep. Part 14. The long night of the lower volume. There is a particular quality to the end of a long story, not the end of a short story. A short story ends, and you feel the shape of it, clean and complete, the whole thing in one view. The end of a long story is different. You have been inside it for a long time. You know its rooms. You know which corridors lead where. You know the smell of the different parts of it. And when it ends, the ending is not the same as the ending of a short story. It is more like arriving at the end of a long road that you have been walking for a long time. You have been walking, and now you have stopped, but you are still in the landscape, still surrounded by the things you saw on the road. The Kojiki is this kind of story, a long road, a long walk through a landscape that is always the same landscape. The islands of Japan, from the age of the gods to the early centuries of the emperors, and now we have reached the end of the road, or the end of this part of it, the lower volume, the age of governance, the smoke and the door, and the spring greens, what you carry when you leave. At the end of a long story, you carry things. You carry the images that settled in you as you went, that established themselves in the part of the mind that keeps things, not because you decided to keep them, but because they arrived and stayed. The egg cracking open, the sky rising, the gods coming into being, in the space between, the two figures on the floating bridge, lowering a spear into the dark water below, the first island forming from the dripping brine, the sun hiding in the cave, the 8 million gods in the dark, the one who danced, the laughter, the light coming back, the white bird over the waiting people, the white bird flying south, the white bird flying home, the man on the hill, the absent smoke, the decision, the door, the poems through the door, the fish going back and forth, the spring greens on the mountain, the many nights. These are the images, the ones that settled, the ones you carry when you leave the road, the feeling, and the feeling. The feeling that runs through the Kojiki is not the feeling you might expect from a founding myth. It is not triumphalism, not the declaration of superiority, not the claim that this people is better than other people, or this land is more sacred than other lands. The feeling is something quieter. It is the feeling of continuity, the feeling that runs between the first gods and the last detailed emperor like a thread that has been held by every person in the story in turn, the thread that connects the egg to the smoke, the thread that runs from Susanoo's poem about the fences to Yuryaku Tenno's poem about the spring greens, the thread that is the unbroken sense that what happened before is part of what is happening now, that the story is one story, that you are in it, the particular. The Kojiki is full of particular things, not general things, particular ones. The tooth of the comb that Izanagi broke off to make a light in Yomi, the chopsticks that Susanoo saw floating in the river, the comb in which Kushinada Hime was kept safe while the sake was brewed, the bag that Yamato Hime gave her nephew, the fire-striking stones in it, the fish in the exchange of poems between Iwanohime and Nintoku Tenno, the spring greens that Yuryaku Tenno planted on the mountain. These are particular things, specific things, things that could not be exchanged for other things without the story being different. This is one of the signs of a story told by people who were there, or who were told by people who were there, or who inherited the telling from people who cared enough to keep the particular details. The particular details survive because they matter, because the story feels wrong without them, because the tooth of the comb is not a torch, the bag is not a sword, the spring greens are not something else. The Kojiki is particular. This is one of its greatest qualities, its willingness to be specific, to give the names, to give the objects, to say exactly this, not approximately that. The quiet, the lower volume is quiet, not silent. It has its stories, it has its poems, it has its moments of sharp feeling, and its genealogies of names, but compared to the upper volume's grandeur, and the middle volume's heroism, the lower volume is quiet. This is appropriate. This is right. The quiet is the quality of the work that is done after the heroic age, the quiet of the person who comes after the hero and has to figure out how to live in the world. The hero left behind. The hero made it possible. The ordinary people who came after made it actual, made it the living daily reality of a country with smoke rising from its kitchens. The quiet is the sound of the ordinary work, the work that does not get white birds, and does not get epic poems, and does not get to be the thing that everyone remembers, the work of governing, the work of keeping, the work of running the world. That was made. You are doing this work, whatever your version of it is. The ordinary work, the work that does not announce itself as heroic, but that is essential to everything continuing. The Kojiki knows this. The lower volume knows this. The smoke on the hill knows this. The smoke is the sign of the ordinary work, the fire that was lit, the meal that is being prepared, the ordinary day continuing, and when there is smoke, the emperor was satisfied, the emperor who let his palace rot to make the smoke possible was satisfied. When the smoke came, your smoke, your fire, your ordinary day, these are the things the Kojiki was made for, not to glorify the extraordinary, to give context to the ordinary, to say, here is where the ordinary comes from, here is the story that contains it, here is the chain that runs from the egg to the smoke. Sleep. The Kojiki is done for tonight. The lower volume is quiet. The smoke is rising somewhere. You are in the story. You have always been in the story. The story includes you. Sleep. The smoke will still be rising. When you wake, the fire that was lit at the beginning of the world, when Izanagi and Izanami first walked around the pillar, is still burning. It burns in every kitchen, in every hearth, in every small light that someone keeps lit through the long night. The fire is old. You are part of its continuity. Your warmth is part of the smoke that the emperor on the hill was looking for. Sleep. Be warm. Let the smoke rise.